Shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan, of the nation of Israel. This particular presentation, it is not going to be long. We don't intend for it to be long. Nonetheless, we want to, brothers and sisters, get into the matter of the statue that was taken down recently or removed recently from the Museum of Natural History in New York City, which depicted the president, Teddy Roosevelt or Theodore Roosevelt, in the era of him shown with an indigenous Indian man and an African man. All right. So some people are saying that it promoted racism, and some people were saying that it did not. What we want to show, brothers and sisters, in this particular matter is that it was a sham to try to sit there and portray the concept, the ideology of saying, well, let's remove it, for racial purposes. And we want to show why we say that. The live is, brothers and sisters, 12 slides. I am going to ask that if people care to get your pens, your pads, your pencils, your paper, and so forth and so on. Because what we're going to get into is involving history and reasoning. On a human level, I want to give a shout out to the sister, the lady in my life, Sarah Michaela Israel of the tribe of Judah. And brothers and sisters, we're going to go into this particular matter, and let us start in this case. The matter of the statue of Teddy Roosevelt. Giving honor to the Creator of heaven and earth. This presentation will be about the matter of the removal of the statue of Teddy Roosevelt and the reason why it is a sham. Let us continue on in this particular case. Statue of Roosevelt and its removal. Now, the Museum of Natural History in New York is a very popular museum. You see it over by Fifth Avenue area as you go going uptown into Manhattan, or through Manhattan, should I say. All right. It is not very, very, very far. Sorry about that. From Harlem. Harlem, brothers and sisters, for those who do know, starts at 110th Street area in Manhattan. There is no quote unquote closest train to the Museum of Natural History in that particular case. Being on Fifth Avenue, it divides east and west in Manhattan. All right. So just want to sit there and go over that for edification purposes. So what you are looking at, brothers and sisters, we want to show what the laser pointer is an image of Teddy Roosevelt or Theodore Roosevelt on a horse. And on this side, you see him shown, brothers and sisters, with an Indian man, and on this side here, an African man. And recently, as shown over here on the right side of the screen, is the removal of such. Now, we want to state why it is a sham and reason for them to remove it. Because if you want to, quote, offer someone an apology, that's one thing. It would have been maybe better to, by the statue, state why it was there and what you didn't intend for it to mean, as opposed to removing it and you still keeping those feelings in your heart. You understand the concept and the ideology of the racism, if you will. Now, why would some people perhaps, say or think of this in a racial matter is, you have a said Caucasian on a horse, and on either side is people who in the United States were plundered and enslaved. Now, let's understand this right here. We are going into, from this quote unquote month of January, into what they call the month of February. And in that month, they have their holidays like Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, Valentine's Day. And it is the shortest month of the year. And what I try to do on this channel, thanking the creator of heaven and earth, is try to, if not twice, then hopefully at least once a week, go over something regarding what is quote unquote Black history. We do not want our story to be treated as if it's just any other mediocre story. Could it be perhaps that the book that is called the Old Testament, in part is called the Old Testament because it holds the record of the enslavement of the Israelites? Shh, let's not talk about what happened in that case. You know, in a way to try to suppress it and not sit there and have it to be known. Of course, as pointed out on the channel, there is external references of the enslavement of the Israelites in ancient Egypt. Now, when you look at this particular thing right here, what are they trying to remove? How can this quickly be shown in connection with the enslavement of the Israelites in ancient Egypt? There is a document that's pointed out in the book Egypt Talk and Writing, and there is evidence in what is called the Apura Papyrus. I want to sit there and type that in, if we will. All right. IPUWER, Apura Papyrus. Now, when me and my lady Sarai was in Egypt, they actually showed us how, using a plant from Egypt, they actually showed us how they make the papyrus thing that people write on. All right, but they didn't allow us to record how it's made. They asked us to not use our phones in that particular case. But anything called the Apura Papyrus, there's a part in there dated to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt that says that scribes are killed and their writings are taken away. Apura spoke about the enslavement of a people and their escape out of being enslaved, and that Egypt being put into darkness and the river being turned into blood and so forth and so on. Brothers and sisters, in that same papyrus, it says scribes are killed and their writings are taken away. What were you trying to take away from the people in killing them? What were you trying to hide? What did you want not to be known? What were you trying to censor? What are you doing when you remove a statue that's been there for over 50 years? It can't be because of what the said Old Testament says about never having any statues up. That's not your culture in America. So there has to be another reason why you don't want that statue up. Let's go on, if you will, brothers and sisters. Article from the New York Times. It was past midnight when a crane descended on the imposing bronze statue of Theodore Roosevelt, lifting his upper body from the pedestal where it had presided at the American Museum of Natural History since 1940. The remainder of the sculpture, now surrounded by scaffolding, is scheduled to leave in pieces through the week, flanked by representations of a Native American man and an African man on foot. The shadow of the president on horseback is diminishing by the day. What do you want to have diminished? What are you trying to sit there and not have it to be known? What are you trying to hide? What are you trying to eradicate from history in this particular case? There's a reason why, and it's not to sit there and say that they have a change of heart. Because if you truly had a change of heart, you would sit there and perhaps keep it up there and state, we changed our heart. We're going to keep this here as a reminder of what we were, but that we changed. You didn't change. You just did a removal. There's a difference between changing your ways and removing yourself from a matter. I want to state again. There is a difference between changing your ways and removing yourself from a matter. Because all you got to do is just move. Move don't mean change. Let's go on to the next part, if we will. Article from the New York Times. A spokeswoman for the institution said that the approximately $2 million removal process was conducted with historic preservation specialists, and several dozen workers. It was approved by multiple New York City agencies. Now, recently in New York, you have a guy now named Adams, and he's a mayor of New York. And correct me if I'm wrong, he's the second black mayor of New York. David Dinkins was the first black mayor of New York City we're talking about now. All right. And he also was the 106th mayor of New York. So David Dinkins, then Rudy Giuliani. Then after Giuliani, you had somebody else, if I'm not mistaken. Then you had Bloomberg. And then you have this brother in time. I'm skipping some, sorry about that. Regarding the list of mayors. But brothers and sisters, in over 100 mayors of New York City, there's only been 2 black ones, and one of them is in the office now in Gracie Mansion. So in light of that, you cannot sit there and state about the actual thing of wanting to hide or your said change from being racist. And we're going to show how it is ingrained in this particular matter. All right? So let us go on into this. The statue is moving to storage and will be shipped to the Presidential Library within a few weeks. The time has come to move it. The museum's president, Ellen V. Fodor, said in an interview with the New York Times. So the removal of this is $2 million. That's $1 million 2 times. And brothers and sisters, while they can afford $2 million for a removal of stone that's been up by the museum for over 50 years, there are people that are up and down Fifth Avenue in Manhattan that are sleeping on the street. And New York is cold right now. Up and down 6th Avenue, you have people who are destitute, but they have enough money to move a statue for $2 million. The priorities of this society is backward. In the Bible, in Jeremiah 10, it says the ways of the nations are brutish. Brutish means like that of a brute. You understand? And so when you look at how they think and rationalize matters, we have to begin to see and know that it is not, in many cases, for the betterment of people. Now, of course, you know, like in many societies, you can be in a situation and get help and assistance and everything like that and try to do better, if you will. But my point, brothers and sisters, in this is, how do you have the ability to spend $2 million for the removal of a statue, but up and down New York City, in Manhattan, the garbage is piling up? Your priorities are not focused. But when you're doing things that's not genuine, when you're doing things that's disingenuous, you're not going to sit back and prioritize your finances and your reasoning right either, because it's not genuine. So the things that are associated with it are also disingenuous. Let us go on, if we will, to the next part. Statue of Roosevelt shown in 1940. Now, brothers and sisters, Roosevelt is shown there on a horse, and on one side, to the right, you have a Native American, and on the other side, as we've shown before, you have an African man on foot. Now, there were Indians, if for the lack of a better term, or Native Americans, that were enslaved by the Europeans. Recently, as some do know, there's this thing about we, the black people, are the indigenous of the Americas. The issue that us as Israelites have with that is when you say we are, you have to identify our name when you say we, and also you have to sit there and name your language and your culture, because everyone has a land, language, and culture. So when one says he or she is an Israelite, you're saying that while you're not even in the land, that the land of Palestine, which was formerly known as the land of Israel, which was before that known as the land of Canaan, is your land. Hebrew is your language, and your culture is the Torah. So that's what the claim is regarding the house of Israel or the Israelites. So if you're saying that we are autonomous or that we are and or indigenous to the Americas, one will then have to ask, what then is your land, language, and culture? Because every human being, even Roosevelt, had a land, language, and culture in origin. All right, so these are just things we want to point out in that particular case. Now, Jefferson, the third president. Now we're going to show, brothers and sisters, how this interacts with each other. The most recent example of a monument removed in New York was that of another former president. In November, the city council relocated the statue of Thomas Jefferson from its chambers to the New York Historical Society after legislators objected to the president's legacy as an enslaver. Now, for those who are familiar with Thomas Jefferson and history with slavery, he had over 600 slaves in the state of New York, by the way, in a place called Monticello, which is in New York State, which is north of New York City. The house that you see on the back of the American nickel is the house that Jefferson had in New York State. He's also the person who was, as a grown man, sleeping with a lady named Sally Hemings, who was a teenager and had children by her. So let's just, quote, ignore slavery for the moment and realize that he cheated on his wife for all intents and purposes, regardless of who he was sleeping with. Let's take away the fact of him cheating on his wife. He did what today is called statutory rape, because Sally Hemings was lower than a certain age. So while he's known as a person who was saying all men are created equal, and while he died in 1826, which was the year right before New York was no longer a slave state, and while he was the vice president of John Adams, the second president of the United States, they try to praise John Adams for he wasn't a slaveholder, but his vice president was. So you can't separate Bush Jr. and William Cheney, also known as Dick Cheney, and Jefferson being the vice president of John Adams. They all were in cahoots, one with the other. John Adams was the person that America selected to go and speak to King George III of England. This is the same King George who helped commission the slave trade by English law. You see how all of this intertwines one with another, for those who understand anything, say, regarding history and so on. Jefferson stated, Virginians favored the abolition of domestic slavery, and for this to occur, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. So he was in the year 1802 all the way to 1808 known for fighting against the slave trade, but not against slavery itself. We want to point that out. He was known for fighting against the slave trade, but not against slavery itself. So while New York is getting rid of Teddy Roosevelt and the said racist implications of that statue, they're also saying that Jefferson's statue was removed. But we're going to show something as this presentation goes on. A matter with Jefferson. The House of Senate agreed on a bill, and it was approved March 2nd, 1807, called an act to prohibit the importation of slaves into any port or place within the jurisdiction of the United States from and after the first day of January in the year of our, they're talking about JC or Jesus, quote, their Lord, our Lord, but not of the house of Israel, 1808. President Thomas Jefferson signed a bill into law on March 2nd, 1807. But for those who are familiar, you know that the Amistad slave ship was seen off of the coast of Long Island, which is part of New York State, in the 1830s. The Portuguese in the 1850s set up slave ports in Manhattan in the 1850s to continue the slave trade. It was done illegally. Now, I want to point something out. When I say, because somebody's asked me, why do I call it the legal trade and the illegal trade? As if to say that I'm saying that it was a good thing to happen. Now, what I'm saying when I say about legal or illegal matter is the fact of saying not of its righteousness, but of its law given by man. That's what I mean by that. A letter on the abolition of the slave trade. We want to point out Wilberforce. William Wilberforce. I'm going to sit there and type that last name in there so people in their own time can look this up. All right, and we're going to see some of the stuff that Wilberforce stated. Let's go on. Excerpts from Wilberforce to Jefferson. But we lament to hear that on the windward coast of Africa, a contraband slave trade has already been commenced by men who call themselves Americans and navigate under the flag and pass of the United States. In the month of March last March, 2 vessels, meaning 2 ships, so navigated were captured on the coast by Captain Parker of the British sloop of war. He goes on to say the following. Both of them were alleged to belong to the United States, and both were laden with Africans carried as slaves and meant to be carried into slavery in the West Indies, contrary to American law. So, okay, it was these people in these ships that were, quote, said African. We already know and understand these people from Africa, but we're going to go on into that matter, right? They were seen by the British and were being brought to the West Indies. This is why when trying to, quote, separate the said of today African American and the West Indian, it doesn't really sit there and make much sense, because you had one ship in history that say went to Antigua, one to Louisiana, one to Jamaica, and the other to Virginia. So how then can one truly separate the said Black West Indian and the said African American? Can't do so for those who truly know of a matter. All right. Now, this is from Wilberforce to Jefferson, the president, right? But the evils, however great, to be brought on Africa by the Americans being suffered in fact, although forbidden by law to carry on the slave trade, will not be merely commensurate with the trade in slaves really carried on by American subjects and with American capital. It is obvious that the danger of a great contraband slave trade carried on by British subjects in British capital will be materially increased if they can safely use the American flag. So what Wilberforce is saying is that you have people using the American flag that are, for the lack of a better term, white or Caucasian, carrying Africans using the American flag, on ships and bringing them over to the West Indies under the ban of, quote, Americans. And this is why he pointed out by saying, which is against American law. All right. So they were still doing the, quote, slave trade, even in what they call the illegal era. Let's go on, if we will, to the next part. Excerpts from Wilberforce to Jefferson, part 2. As the law now stands, it is to be feared that officers making captures of this kind, though they cannot treat the Africa captives as property, may be made liable to answer for them as such. For it seems that the British tribunals of prize have restored cargoes of slaves claimed by Americans, though carried contrary to the law of their own country, which prohibited the foreign slave trade. So these are things we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, William Wilberforce was an abolitionist. He was a person that was fighting against slavery and, quote, the slave trade itself. All right. So let's go on if we continue in this particular case. Right. It goes on to say here, and though in the case is now somewhat different, when the laws of both countries have prohibited the carrying of slaves from Africa at any direction. Now, when he says two countries, he's talking about America and Britain. He's talking about America and Britain. These are the two countries that William Wilberforce is saying when it says that both countries had prohibited the carrying of slaves from Africa. Now, why do I want to point that out? We want to highlight that because you have, and I say this in no disrespect, all right? When the laws of both countries have prohibited the carrying away of slaves from Africa. There's no evidence of them saying that there were slaves brought from Africa. There was only 500,000. What are you talking about? This right here in the letter to the President of the United States talks about that. In the book that's written called Deuteronomy 28, History Untold to the Masses, I pointed out, thank the Most High, that Bill Clinton talked about the slave trade, that the other person, Bush, talked about the slave trade. And in the book to be shown later on, I speak about how Nigerian and other African leaders talk about them selling people as slaves to be brought to the Western Hemisphere. See, because the general consensus by some now is a lot of Africans don't even know about the slave trade. Get your passports and travel. Go and see the point of no return. Go to see Gory Island. Go to them places in Western Africa where people in Africa talk to you about the slave trade itself. Go online and pick up and see the movie Sankofa, Sankofa. Sankofa, Sankofa, in which in there's a part where a person who is walking around the slave area with culture on, looking as if he came from one of the camps of the Israelites. You understand? And he's up there saying that the people were taken from this land and brought to Jamaica and America and Trinidad and treated as captives. Look at the Jamaican currency where they start talking about Nanny or Nani, who was a person who passed away in the 18th century, and she was taken directly as a captive from Ghana. Go when you get the chance to get the book, Israelite History as it relates to the world. That's a book that I wrote, Thank the Most High. In that book, Israelite History as it relates to the world, I list the slaves who spoke in North Carolina about them saying that their grandparents were taken out of Africa as captives. See, when we present things, brothers and sisters, we're not trying to belittle, disrespect, or anything like that. We just want to show why we're saying what we're saying. All right. And while the people's attention is open, quote unquote, toward Black History Month, I'm not a pantser, but I will say, like the book says, I think it's a book by Huey Newton of the Black Panther, seize the time. So when the people's attention is there, seize it. Speak on it. Solomon in the Bible talks about by saying a word spoken in a timely manner. So if you're going into the area or the era, of what they call, quote, Black History Month, why would you not sit there and take the time to use it to talk about Black history? Let's go on, if we will, brothers and sisters. All right. It is not, however, sir, for me to presume to point out that we may best become the dignity and liberality of the American government in respect of the vessels, but we trust that of a captor under a mistake as to the law, or the fact has unwarrantably seized them, it will not be forgotten by that same act he delivered 165 human beings whom the American government may feel itself bound to protect from perpetual exile and bondage, and that on this account there will be no wish to subject him to any penal consequences. We don't want our story about what happened with us as being enslaved to be our only focus. Yes, slavery is part of our history, but it's not where our history began. But I think the Most High to have a mind and a heart to go into this subject while not denying our history about the kingdoms that existed in the past. The kingdom of Kumasi, the kingdom of Oyo, the Zegzeg, the Nufa, the Oyo, the Ashanti, the Dahomey, the kingdom of Ghana, the matter of, brothers and sisters, Timbuktu. Some of those things is part of the history prior to our enslavement here in the Western Hemisphere. Nonetheless, we don't want to minimize the fact that the first recorded known ship, SHIP, to come into what is now the United States dates not to 1619, brothers and sisters, but dates, brothers and sisters, to 1526. I state again, it dates to 1526. We've all, in many cases, have heard of the guy, what's his name? John Hawkins. John Hawkins being a person who was an enslaver. He worked for Queen Elizabeth I. So Mary Markle married into the line of the British royalty that goes all the way back to Queen Elizabeth I, who had a worker named John Hawkins, who used to bring captives from Africa to places such as Venezuela. Get your history up. Brothers and sisters, we don't want to minimize the fact that the slave trade and the enslavement of our people here in the Western Hemisphere was made legal before the United States even existed. See, the United States as a legal term existed since 1776. Georgia, the state of Georgia, which was said colony then, made slavery legal in 1750. 26 years before the United States existed, the area today called Georgia had slavery made legal. Did you know? Oh, let's not jump the gun. Let's go into the next part, brothers and sisters. Thomas Jefferson matter. Now, the person that you see in there on the side is one of the slaves of Thomas Jefferson. You know Thomas Jefferson, who we spoke about earlier. Now, how all this intertwined is because they're trying to, by removing the statue of Teddy Roosevelt, they're saying, yeah, and we removed the 1, 2 of Thomas Jefferson, but it's already etched in your American fabric, which we're going to talk about later. Remember that statement. Runaway slave. Thomas Jefferson. This was an article that was made by Thomas Jefferson concerning a runaway slave. You see why they call the book that the Most High spoke in the Old Testament? Do you know that in the Old Testament, it says when a runaway slave comes to you, that you're not supposed to return the runaway slave back to his master? That's in the book of Deuteronomy, brothers and sisters. North Carolina had it in law that anyone who was harboring a runaway slave is to be put into incarceration. So when we talk about the area of today, the quote Bible Belt, they talked about their part of the Bible when he said who their Lord was in the year such and such. That's their book, that part there. That's the part, and I say this in no disrespect to any brother or sister who is said to be Bible-based, but you already know the history of the Israelites. This is an Israelite YouTube channel, by the way. You know good and well that when the Ark of the Covenant was stolen by the Philistines in the book of Samuel, they returned the Ark of the Covenant with their gods with it in the book of Samuel. Well, brothers and sisters, when the Greeks and the Romans, with the assistance of the Edomites, got a hold of our records, and Israel was pushed into Western Africa as a people and then shipped to the Western Hemisphere, when we got our book back, they put something else with it. Just as much as when the Philistines stole the Ark of the Covenant, Israel got the Ark of the Covenant back the same way it was not before. So is it the same with our records. That's why you don't have a Hebrew word for Bible. You only have Tanakh, Torah, law, Nebi'im, prophets, Ketubim, writings. The said Old Testament. There is no Hebrew word for the word Bible because it's not a Hebrew document. The Hebrew document ended in the said Old Testament. The Romans did not like the God of the Hebrews. Tacitus of Rome spoke about that in so many words. So getting back into this, here you have the president of the said United States, Thomas Jefferson. There's a picture of one of his slaves there. You can look that up. Thomas Jefferson slaves, Master on the Mountain. There's a book called Master on the Mountain. You can get on Amazon where it talks about that. And here we see run away from the matter with Thomas Jefferson. A mulatto slave called Sandy, about 35 years of age. This is their president, brothers and sisters. This is the guy that's on the $2 bill. Are they going to change that? While they remove the statues? They're on their currency. Let's go on, brothers and sisters. Conclusion and reason. Thank you for listening, liking, and please feel free to comment. The purpose and part of this presentation was to show that while many feel it is a step in progress and removing of the statue, it is still inbred in the heart of the American fabric. Remember, I was asking you all to remember that statement. Here's why. That which is inbred in slavery. Texas and Mississippi, in their speeches in 1861, stated slavery is the reason they succeeded from the Union. So when people try to sit there and say, oh, the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery, a lie or a tale, and I know I don't have the Jamaican voice, don't get me wrong, but you're telling a tall tale or you're speaking falsehood, called mirma in Hebrew, meaning deceit or falsehood. All right? So when you're looking at this, it says that Texas and Mississippi in their speeches, you can go online and look that up. In 1861, they stated the reason why they left the Union and joined the Confederacy is partly because of slavery. The governor of South Carolina, Hammond, in 1845 stated that slavery is the cornerstone of our /America republic edifice. The cornerstone. You know, the thing that joins two things together, like the stone that's in the corner of something, like the base of it. Slavery existed longer than freedom in that society or this society. The removal of a statue is not going to end the ideas of their hearts. It is done in a way to pacify people and to have people think we are achieving, while streets, schools, and cities are named after them whose statues are removed. Jefferson has a school named after him. There are cities named Jefferson, like Jefferson in Oregon, if I remember right. There's a school called Jackson in New York. Jackson was a slave master. So they have it inbred in there. These books are online. Get them. Thanks. And the link is going to be put in the description. All right. This ends the presentation. Giving honor and praise to the Most High. Shout out on a human level to Brother Nekemia Ben Yashraal. Shout out to my lady, Sarah Michaela Yisrael. Shout out to Ibria Yisrael. And shout out to everybody else at the sound of the voice. Please like, share, and subscribe. I have it to where you can leave a comment. Check the description for contact info. All right. Most High bless. Stay tuned. We intend to do more presentations as we get, quote unquote, closer to what they call, quote unquote, Black History Month as time goes on. Shalom. Most High bless.